Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to the Lab Out Loud podcast, Science for the Classroom and Beyond. And our guest today has been explaining the world and answering some of its toughest questions. Like so many of us, he finds his audience by using the internet.
You know, every part of my career has just been about like the weird ways the internet lets you find an audience that might be like geographically scattered or from different, parts of the world or ages or whatever, and come together around a shared interest in something. And so my approach has always been to just try to find the things that I'm excited about or interested in and try to figure out a way to explain why I'm excited about that thing and show it in a way that hopefully, reaches other people.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first, I'm your co-host Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
And today our guest is someone whose work we have been following for years. Today, Randall Munroe joins us.
Hello, this is Randall.
Randall is the author of several books and creator of the webcomic XKCD. Brian, you've been following XKCD probably as long as I have. How would you describe it?
Oh, it's something that touches our inner science teacher, because we find things that are close to our hearts that are appearing in comics, and beyond that, he puts a lot of research into it as well. So his comics aren't only funny in a sense; they have layers of messages in them too.
Oh, exactly. And I think that those layers have been drawing me in through the years. And one of the main reasons I wanted to get Randall on the show was to thank him for his work. Randall, I thought about this preparing for this podcast, and it turned out to just be like a thank you tour. I wanted to thank you for all these different things that you've done. And one of them was, it just taught me how to draw stick figures. I don't know what those creatures from the Star Wars Clone Wars were, where they had really tall necks, but I was a high school physics teacher, and every time I drew stick figures, they were those big, tall things. And when I saw your comics, I'm like, oh, I could just make the arms come from the head, and it looks so much better. So I would always use your comics as a guide.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I feel like they look better that way, but I mean, maybe if I had just grown up doing them a different way, it would look normal that way. I feel like lots of people have done stick figures differently. It's been around since like cave paintings. So yeah, there are a lot of ways to do it. I don't know if mine is the best, but that's the way that looks the most normal to me.
I would use them for, if I was doing a lot of times where I was doing problems and I'm like, oh, I got to draw a boat, and I'm not, I tried doing like books and stuff, but there are times where I would just Google XKCD and boat and then just get some guidance from one of your quick drawings or something like that. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Man. And I'll just, yeah.
Yeah.
You should build an extension with that filter in it, Dale.
There you go.
Man, but there's some stuff that every time I try to draw it, I got to Google something too. And then airplanes are the hardest for me, especially like airliners.
Yes.
Because they don't have any right angles. I just know sort of simple technical drawing geometry.
Yeah.
But when you've got an airplane that's made up out of lots of, acute angles and slight bends and stuff,
all my airplanes look like, like there was a loaf of bread coming out of it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Flying bread. I think that's going to be a thing. Well, since we're talking about drawing and doodling, things like that, do you have any kind of hierarchy between doodle, drawing, comic, cartoon? Is there one you like more than other, or are you offended by any of those terms?
You mean in terms of the language? No. People are sometimes. I know some people are really picky about that, but I've never been too. I don't know. It feels a little silly to get really hung up on comic versus cartoon versus drawing. It sort of gets into what is art argument.
Yeah, it does. Well, I do think there are some doodle snobs out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. I hope they find happiness. That's fine with me.
That's perfect. One of the things we saw last time with your, I can't remember which book came out, and we started to learn, I think it was Thing Explainer, which I have right here. There was some press about your drawings showing up in textbooks. I think HMH, they were going to be in some science books. Has that happened?
Yeah. They've got they incorporated some of the drawings from Thing Explainer and then some original diagrams for other processes they wanted to illustrate into a general science curriculum text.
Those are all good.
It was really cool.
Yeah, I haven't seen the science textbook ones. I was looking for that. I saw some, like, people took screenshots of, or they just took like cell phone camera pictures of their stats book, and they're like, "Look, XKCD's in my stats book."
Oh yeah, there's also constantly, authors who are working on a textbook or something and want to illustrate it, especially stats people. I have a couple stats comics that stats professors love to use, and so they'll include the individual comics in books as well.
Well, our organization was, until recently, the National Science Teachers Association, and they went through a name change just recently, National Science Teaching Association. Our intent was to recognize all the different ways science education comes to our students. So it's not just that traditional classroom. So we're kind of celebrating the different modes. And certainly your work is a good example of that. Do you see yourself as an educator?
I mean, I guess. It's sort of like the difference between drawings and doodles. It's not something that I really get hung up on dwelling on. But certainly I'm like half of what I do is I read about really exciting or interesting things or points or ideas in science that I really want to get across to people, and then trying to find a cool way to do that, whether it's in a book or a cartoon or going on a podcast.
Well, do you wrestle with how will the audience take this ever, or is it just like I create it, I put it out there, and let's see what happens?
It's more the second one. Yeah. What I do is I don't. People will often ask, do I have a particular audience in mind for a book or something? And really, every part of my career has just been about the weird ways the internet lets you find an audience that might be geographically scattered or from different parts of the world or ages or whatever,
sure.
And come together around shared interest in something. And so my approach has always been to just try to find the things that I'm excited about or interested in and try to figure out a way to explain why I'm excited about that thing and show it in a way that hopefully, reaches other people. But it's sort of like whoever else thinks, this particular process of siphoning water from one pool to another is as weird and interesting as me. And I'm not never sure who that is. And I'm often surprised to see oh, hey, someone who worked on this research or someone who, does it comes from some random other career is really into this too,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was going to say that's just been a magical thing with the internet. I think about my teenage children. They have the opportunity, unlike I did, to see that there are other people like you. And you can do your thing, and there's a group for you. That's what's nice about it. Mm-hmm. We all know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's Dale brought up his children. My middle school son actually loves your books. He's been reading.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. He's been reading. It's kept us he's kept him occupied many a night. But he will read. He's read What If and then How To. And I actually encouraged him to look into What If. One of our guests actually said that her son reads it, and I was like, oh. And so I got that. And then when we recently got How To in the mail, it's I was excited to get it, but I also knew that we had this conversation coming up, so I had it out, and it kept disappearing. So he'd take it and he'd read it, and I had to you have to go grab it. I have to get the book today, and so he kind of begrudgingly brought it out. But so he's like, when are you talking to him? And I'm like, well, it's coming this afternoon. And I said, what would you ask him? What would you ask Randall if you had the chance? So his response was, how did you get started in your career, and do you have cats?
Huh.
I like how those two go together.
They just ran together like one question. How did you get started in your career, and do you have cats?
I got started by accident, by drawing, doodling in my notebooks during class. And then at some point I had a website that I wasn't doing very much with, and I had a bunch of drawings that I had made that I wanted to save before the notebooks fell apart, or I had to get rid of all my old schoolwork. And so I scanned in some of the drawings and stuck them in a folder on my website, and then got surprised to find people sort of started passing them around. And I thought, oh, if people like these, I can do some more of these. And then I was surprised to discover that the ones that I was doing about like the science that I was learning about, or, technical topics or whatever, that, oh, wow, I'm not the only one who's, frustrated with this particular aspect of operating system design. And so I kind of found my community that way. I found a lot of people who were, felt the same way I did, and stumbled into that career of drawing comics and then eventually writing about this stuff sort of by accident. And I do not currently have cats.
Okay, well, he was holding one of our cats at the time, so I'm sure that's probably where the conversation came from. But thank you for being honest about that.
Hey, why would he lie?
I don't know. Like, yes, I have 8 cats or something. It just seems like that would be a good question to. That's a hyperbole thing. You can just go with. No one, who knows? I myself was a science teacher in like the biological sciences, and so Far Side was actually one of the comics that I went to for inspiration, and I noted other colleagues of mine maybe using them in their work. I of course would never do that. I mean, that's a copyright violation, of course. But do you see that happening with some of your comics where that's being used in classes and other things like that? And how do you feel about that?
Oh yeah, I mean it's extremely cool if someone thinks that my explanation or my like joke about something adds something to their teaching, to their research, their whatever. That I'm always happy to see it show up in places like that.
We used to do the Far Side ones in physics classes too, but you're right.
Yeah,
I'm trying to. Gary Larson was. He did not like people using his stuff. So then I was always weirded out by it. So I always appreciated like yours was like, you guys can use them if you're using them this way and this way.
Yeah. Well, and it's something like, I know this is another place where like lots of people have lots of different opinions, and I found a solution that works for me. But like, I know, for example, Bill Watterson, Calvin and Hobbes, which is the comic that I grew up just revering, that he spent most of his 10 years drawing Calvin and Hobbes in like grueling deathmatch fights with the syndicate over licensing rights, where they wanted to like put Calvin on merchandise and do TV specials and give him a voice. And Bill Watterson wanted, no, just keep it in, my comic. And
there was that documentary about
he wanted creative control. Yeah. And so like, I feel like I'm sympathetic to that. I can see how you might want to kind of lay down a clear line about that kind of thing. But I think that this kind of use, like, I want to use your comic in one of my slides for my class or something, like, sure, of course, that's fine.
Well, fantastic. Yeah. We don't see a lot of XKCD merchandise around. The one thing I would love to see...
They're at the NSTA booth. There's the T-shirt, stand back, I'm going to do science, and then there's a tie.
Yeah. You know what I would love to see?
Yeah, and there's some through my website, but
it's not as...
it is not so much, it's not so much, getting partners to brand everything with comics.
What I think would be a fantastic... I think would be a fantastic niche for your area is, you see those bumper stickers where they have like so many, like the nuclear family, like the father and the mother and the kids or whatever. And,
those
you
decals.
See some reversions of that. You could easily make like the family XKCD bumper stickers, or you could get individual ones. Cause, what I would love to see was when they actually make jokes off of that. Kind of like when you see like 0.00 because no one in this car has ever run a marathon kind of a thing. Like you could do some fun ones there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually looked at doing that at one point, and then it ended up being this surprising production headache that I wasn't really expecting.
Oh, that's
really.
And I think there was a year when I was like, okay, we're gonna get these, and we had put together some, and then they got lost in the mail, and it was just
sure.
And then I had moved on, but no, I've always liked that.
That makes me think of a question. Do your characters have names, or because it seems like there's like a main character, which I always kind of attribute to as you. And then there's like the one with the stovepipe hat kind of person, and there's just different ones. Do you have names for them? Are they or?
I kind of I follow sort of the pattern, what I think of as like the pattern of the Far Side, where there are sort of recurring characters, but unless the script requires them to, to have it's ambiguous whether they're continuing characters from one to the next.
Yeah.
They sort of each comic stands alone. So I kind of have it has the level of ambiguity that it has. I try not to add too much to that outside of what you see in the comic.
Sure.
All right. Do you get anyone pushing back on any of your work in terms of like, maybe the content or the setup, the artistry, scientific credibility?
Now and then. I actually, I don't know. I keep kind of a low profile on things like social media, so I'm not, otherwise I'd be out there arguing constantly with people about.
You don't make it an easy target, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I try to do my homework, and sometimes people argue, and I just have to like avoid it because I finally did a comic about this, about how like it's really easy to get sucked into unproductive arguments on the internet. And,
that seems to be a recurring theme
like the
sometimes.
Understatement for our time. But what I found was, so I did a comic about someone who was staying up late, refusing to go to bed because someone was wrong on the internet, and they had to argue with them. And I did this comic partly, just because I thought it was a funny thing, but also partly because I was kind of putting a check on myself. Because then I couldn't, after that, get too mad on the internet because someone could always reply like, "Oh, hey, looks like someone's mad that someone else is wrong on the internet. Have you seen this comic about it?" And then like throw my own comic back at me.
Oh wow, you like
and
pre-called yourself
out of your
out.
sails like that. Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and no, well, sort of to answer your earlier question about slides, one thing that always really intimidates me is people. Is I'll do a comic about some neat technical subject that I'm learning about, or some neat scientific topic or something. And then occasionally I get a letter from someone saying that, "Oh yeah, my colleague so-and-so uses the comic in your slides or in their slides.
Yeah.
The comic you drew about it." And it'll turn out to be like the person whose work the comic was based on. And I find that like incredibly intimidating.
Sure.
Sure.
There was one I did a joke forever ago about like the RSA encryption algorithm, which is like the main, the archetypical public key encryption algorithm that has been revolutionized modern cryptography and made internet banking possible and so on. And then someone sent me a note that their friend Ron Rivest, who's the R in RSA, was using it in his slides about his algorithm. And
wow.
I was like, oh my God. And my first thought wasn't like, oh, that's so exciting. It was like, oh no, I hope I got it right. I got to go check my math.
It's kind of like having like a bobblehead made of yourself. Like, you've made it if you get a bobblehead made, but then that's a lot of pressure on the artist to make sure you get their likeness.
Yeah,
correct,
exactly.
Right?
It's like, at least if I take a picture of myself, I can like, oh, that looks weird. I'll delete that one. Try again. But with the bobblehead, it's like, oh, it looks weird. Maybe I just look like that.
Do you have to make corrections ever, or have you ever done that on one of your comics? Like, okay, this needs to be updated.
Oh yeah.
How do you do that then?
Yeah. So I mean, you can the ones that I post online occasionally there'll be like a some number, something that I need to fix, or I'll put up an address of something and it'll be wrong.
Sure.
The one thing though, and for the most part, I really try to do my homework and and then especially anything that's happening in print, because it's a lot harder to send out corrections to things in print. And then once I've done the basic corrections, then I try to leave it to history and not, George Lucas it up. I keep going back and tweaking things.
Okay.
One thing that I will say though is I thought I was a pretty good speller until I started handwriting a comic for a lot of people, some of whom are very good spellers, without an editor in between.
Oh, sure.
I think I was in college before I learned that I was spelling document wrong my whole life.
When you write it out, sometimes it just looks different too.
Yeah, and like necessary.
I can't spell that word.
Occurring is another one.
Well, and as a teacher, like writing it on the board is really tough.
One rule of thumb that always really helped me was, and this has one or two exceptions, but it's actually a pretty solid one, which is if you've got a word that you know has a double letter in it somewhere, but you don't know which one it is, don't jump the gun. Hold off. Wait until it'll come later. And so like satellite is one where I would always SATT, but nope, the double letter is not your first opportunity. It's one of the later ones. And that works for a bunch of words that I used to have a lot of trouble with.
Well, I actually found a spelling error in How To. Under the drone chapter, you spelled Mavic Pro with a K.
Oh, man. So
you corrected that later, so it wasn't like a consistent error. And I actually had to check myself, like, am I seeing this wrong, or did this? Like, I questioned myself.
Oh, sure.
Because it was in your book. It was like, he does his research.
Yeah, well, I think I used it. I used the name multiple places, and it might have been different in one and from another. But it was a brand name where I never know if it's like Mavic, like Maverick, or but Maverick has both a C and a K, and so that's one that I've always gotten wrong because I don't type drone brand names very often.
Well, you go back to you use the Mavic Pro. Is that do you have experience with that? You actually have quite a few references of drones in How To. Yeah,
no, I actually don't. That was the one that so that was in the chapter where we got Serena Williams to hit a tennis ball at a drone.
She went up in my estimation, and it's amazing to hear that. Yeah.
So she actually did it?
Yeah. Yes, she actually did it. We actually got Serena Williams to hit a tennis ball at a drone and try to shoot it down. I was really, really surprised that she was so willing to help out.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
So the reason they used that particular drone model was it was one that her husband had gotten a while ago and had a broken camera. And so she was willing to sacrifice it for science, I guess.
That's awesome. It's kind of funny because I noticed a few times where you use drones. So I utilize the index. And I went through and I'm like, oh yeah, he has drones here. But what I kind of expected this, but I didn't find it. I almost expected you to have an illustration reference in the index. So for instance, on page 194, you talk about how to walk a dog, and there's obviously drones there, but you don't say the word drone. But it's not in the index.
Wow.
That's true.
We're going into the weeds.
It's, the indexing is a whole field that I didn't know about. This is the first book of mine that's had an index. And so I don't know, it seems like a rabbit hole you could go really deep into
absolutely.
My problem is that if they let me do the index directly, I would start putting in all kinds of self-referential things, like here's a pointer to indices, and then a reference for self-reference, which refers back to itself. And then
and we've gone circular.
References that don't contain themselves. Yeah, exactly.
Put your hand down, Randall. You're not doing the index this time.
Yeah. I did enjoy some of the weird stuff that we got to put in the index. There is a fun survey of all the bizarre topics that
for people who don't
the book covers,
who don't go into the index unless it's for information. You got to peruse it a little bit.
I think about the kids listening. Maybe they're drawing it in class and they're not supposed to be. I know that you've talked about. I heard you talk about that you were a doodler in school. That there were drawings that you worked on. Was there ever a time where it got you in trouble or you were discouraged, or particular memory about drawings in school?
Well, one thing I found is that when I was drawing repetitive shapes or maps or something that didn't take a lot of, attention, I actually found that it helped me listen better, if I'm just filling in something, it sort of took the edge off of my inattention and gave me something to, it's twiddling your thumbs or something. And so there would be, sometimes I'd do an elaborate map of a, fictional world or whatever. And I could remember what part of the lecture we were listening to when I drew each part of it.
Well, there's actually some research to back that up now. And there's students who do sketchnoting now. They actually illustrate the notes in a sense, not necessarily random, but they try to incorporate drawings within their notes.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
It's really kind of fascinating to watch.
A lot of pressure, though, if your notes although if your notes include an airplane, I'd be like, wait, I got to stop the lecture. I've got to draw this like 20 times to get it right.
Well, it's you can see them in conferences. They have first of all, they have this pencil case of all these different colors because they're going full tilt on this. They want to make sure they get it right, and then they tweet it out. It's actually really cool because you get more of a sense of what was going on than just like a phrase or a quote sometimes.
Yeah, it's like another form
really
of
neat.
listening.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't heard of that.
So before we let you go, obviously you do a lot of research for your content and in your drawings there too. And we're talking to students again who they're being asked to evaluate research or do some research or evaluate media. What do you have for suggestions for them in terms of, how do you do that and what's reliable?
I don't know. There's the scholar, I think Dana Boyd, has said some interesting stuff about how to teach media, about what media literacy, how to teach that, and whether in what circumstances it can backfire. Sometimes I worry that telling people well, here's how to think critically as a topic, and here's how to evaluate research, whether it doesn't just make them feel more confident cherry picking research. But I just don't know. I'm not an educator. I mean, I'm not a what's the word for person who teaches teaching. I don't know. I mean, I have a physics degree, so it makes me think I can do everyone else's job really well.
You have a comic about that, actually.
But I try to be humble about that. So I don't know. I think just teaching people my inclination is to just teach people themselves to try to read a lot of stuff and try not to be too confident that they've got it right, and just try to cast your net a little widely and compare things together and different sources, but then always try to reevaluate your core assumptions and don't just try to look for stuff that fits neatly into whatever argument you've already decided to believe.
Sure. Well, they're excellent advice to end on. Thank you so much, Randall.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you. I'm sorry we didn't have more time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.